4 right now.
It is at mine as well.
And we are also going to record this meeting, so that is already started as per the settings for this webinar. I'm just gonna see if we actually already have some participants, which is really, really great. So thank you so much for joining. We just maybe gonna give people a couple of minutes before we can join. So because we can start the webinar. So obviously, it's really great to have everyone here attending today. I mean, we are obviously very much looking forward to the discussion. And there is a few people with quite a lot of experience. So yeah. Yes, and then maybe also sort of some housekeeping notes or information about the questions. So we really wanted to keep this webinar as interactive as possible. So every participant has the possibility to show themselves and obviously speak as well at this webinar. So this is sort of what was very important for us to ensure. And having said that, if you could maybe keep your questions more towards the end of this webinar, unless there is something very, very pressing, you want to share some experience, and then please do raise your hand. There is this possibility to do that. We will try to monitor that while we're speaking. So, but bear that in mind. But towards the end, we will look at the questions received, and I think we can also ask them questions directly. So we really wanted to keep it more of a like a conversation rather than sort of dry execution. So I think we're good to start. So Denisa, if you... Right, so first of all, I would like to introduce all the presenters, experts that we have today. So I will start with myself. My name is Anna Polak, and I'm the CEO and founder of AnRes Clinical. I have at the moment 20 years experience in clinical development and clinical trial oversight and management. So I have been working both at the biotech side as well as the CRO side. So I have quite comprehensive experience, and I have had the opportunity to participate in a number of CNS programs, so clinical development programs. So that includes epilepsy, so 2 trials in epilepsy. That includes also treatment-resistant depression, so 2 projects in treatment-resistant depression, as well as ALS. And I'm also just for everyone, a pharmacist by training. So I will hand over to Phoebe Plomaritis, who will introduce herself.
Hi. Yes, I'm Phoebe Plomaritis. I've also been in clinical research for some time, probably now over 20 years. I have experience as a clinical consultant, so I work in clinical oversight, monitoring and management, and also as a GCP auditor. I have also worked extensively in CNS for approximately 12 years. For starters, I worked with Bristol Myers Squibb and worked on their entire CNS portfolio, which included bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, dementia, Alzheimer's, PTSD, pediatric studies involving ADD, ADHD, and also pediatric depression studies. And then following that, when I became a consultant, I also got involved in more than one CNS trial. So my background's actually in a BS in chemistry from IU. Yeah, looking forward to the meeting today. One more thing I should add. Sorry. I've also been working with Anna for several years now in oversight monitoring in the US. And I've also built some US based oversight programs for several companies. And I've, in the last approximately 3 years, had the opportunity to start working with Anna, who's global. So that's our collaboration. Thanks.
So Nanna,
Yeah.
would you like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying hi, everyone. So my name is Nanna Nielsen, and I've been working for a couple of years now with Anna at AnRes Clinical, where I have and still do work as a clinical research associate for CNS studies, but also as a monitoring oversight coordinator for our worldwide program. And in relation to CNS, I've worked with both Alzheimer's disease and also ALS specifically. And as my background, I have a master's degree within biomedicine. Yeah.
Annemarie?
I was on mute. Hi, thanks, Nanna. And hello, everybody. My name is Annemarie Kleefstra. I'm based in the Netherlands. I've been in clinical industry, well, drug development for over 20 years, fast. Majority of that in clinical, working mostly with biotechs. I have a large range of expertise in different rare disease indications. And I've worked from every angle in the industry at the clinical operational side. And I'm losing my voice. And it is from overseeing trials and supporting sponsors, mostly small biotechs, that I now do a lot of consulting and assisting with setting up that oversight properly, vendor selection, and the overall risk management in that. My experience in CNS is with DMD, gene therapy, as well as working on 2 programs for HD as well as ALS. Gentiane?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Gentiane Verstraeten. I'm a quality consultant working in pharma industry since more than 30 years. Currently going back from an audit, so I'm in a taxi for more minutes, so sorry if I do not open the camera. And I'm collaborating with Anna since a couple of years, helping to improve quality in clinical trial and being involved in a lot of CNS program in Europe. So, everyone.
Thank you so much, Gentiane. Much appreciated. Especially, I know you are traveling, and then so yeah, thank you for making the time in the busy agenda. So let's move to our agenda for today, for this meeting today. So we are going to talk about why CNS clinical trials fail. Also, what is monitoring oversight? Are we going to have a look at metrics when clinical trials are closely monitored? Then also, we're going to look at how monitoring oversight contributes to the overall sponsor oversight of clinical trials. And we're going to close that off with discussing protecting endpoint integrity, which will take us to the discussion, questions, and key takeaways towards the end of this meeting. So next slide, please. So let me start with some numbers that should make everyone think here. So I have had a look at the report prepared by the Biotechnology Innovation Organization and Pharma Intelligence. This is covering years 2011 to 2020. It's quite a comprehensive report, but it really gives a very, very good overview and comparison of the success rates for CNS clinical trials. So we are looking at the approximately 6% success probability starting from phase 1 to approval. So that is significant significantly lower than the average, which is approximately 10%, and quite significantly even further lower from hematology as well as metabolic diseases. But let's look how this sort of the probability only 27% drug candidates in CNS diseases, and that's both for neurology and psychiatry, succeed after between phase 2 and phase 3. Of course, there are different reasons. There could be not sufficient efficacy, and there could be also not sufficiently adjusted dose. So basically, the proportion between the dose and the pharmacological effect doesn't give us the statistically significant outcome. Then when we look at the phase 3, here it's more optimistic. So approximately half of the trials succeed in their phase 3. But even if companies progress to submission of the marketing authorization application, still we are not sort of at home. The success is not guaranteed, because we have 83% chance to succeed here. But it's really, really great to see this overview, especially in comparison to other therapeutic indications. If we progress to the next slide, please. So I wanted to also show how this potential financial loss could look like, and what it actually translates into in terms of the costs. So more or less, on average, CNS clinical trials, phase 3 clinical trials would have approximately 300 patients. And this type of trials can cost between $15 million to even $40 million dollars. So we're looking here at the sort of total cost, not only the cost of hiring or engaging a CRO, but also all the other costs like manufacturing, for example, and any additional logisticals, and also the cost of the sponsor team. So this number is quite significant. Then when we sort of translate into per patient cost, that the total cost, we are looking at $50,000 to $133,000. And you can see, what loss of one patient, what it actually translates into in terms of the financials. And let's say, for whatever reason, we lose a certain percentage of data of patients. Let's just assume it's 20%, and that immediately translates into a loss of $3 to $8 million right away. And this is just a loss, just without counting the costs of the mitigation that you have to take into consideration. So as you know, you would have to expand the study duration, increase the cost to recruit the additional patients, or replace the data in some way if possible. So there is already the cost here, but there is also the lost time for the potential drug candidate on the market. And as you know, these patent clocks, they don't wait for remediation. Next slide, please. So here is the real life example of how failure may look like. So I have chosen a soticlestat example from Takeda, which was one of the more recent failures, specifically in epilepsy. So it was novel mechanism of action, so quite a lot of excitement about this modality from the clinical community. Phase 2 has been positive, so that obviously the company has set up 2 phase 3 trials in 2 similar indications. One was in Dravet syndrome, and the other one was in Lennox-Gastaut. And both of them, unfortunately, have failed. And especially this failure feels even it hits even harder, because it wasn't a spectacular fail. It was just a very narrow miss of the primary endpoint, where we had only 0.01 miss in terms of the p-value. Interestingly enough, secondary endpoints were met. So clearly the drug has been beneficial for patients, but in the end, both of the programs, unfortunately, could not demonstrate benefit for this patient population, and this all resulted in Takeda terminating development of soticlestat. When looking at sort of at reasons why this trial may have failed, of course, there is limited publicly available information, but we can point out, obviously, one is potentially the noise from the data supporting the primary endpoint, but also maybe the patient population hasn't been sort of rectified. There was some suggestion that maybe some of these patients were too refractory, also due to the number of previously used anti-seizure medication. So this is just one of the examples that we wanted to bring to you today. So next slide, please. So there are certain factors when it comes to CNS clinical trials which we cannot control, and we are all continuously learning and improving our knowledge to obviously find these more effective therapies. So here I just wanted to show that, you know, this is obviously not just operational reasons. This could be other reasons that are much more difficult to control, and this is maybe the disease is not sufficiently understood. A lot of the diseases, such as Alzheimer's disease, is more of a collection of subtypes, and there can be some small differences in the pathomechanism of these diseases, of subtypes of the diseases, as well as there are many factors playing in the development of these conditions. Another reason that is also pointed out, that it's the sort of late intervention very often, and we could also see it from the Alzheimer's disease clinical trials, that when the intervention was at the sort of pre-symptomatic stage or very early, a lot of the drugs were actually more effective. But in many cases, when these patients make it to a clinical trial, sometimes we're already past that damage, the neural damage that has been obviously caused by these diseases. There are also two other factors I wanted to point to. So this is could be high placebo response, especially in the psychiatry indications, as well as lack of validated or insufficient number of validated biomarkers. Did I hear someone wanted to add something? Or? In any case, if not, then let's go to the next slide. And here I would like to hand over to Phoebe to discuss things that where we have potentially more control of, and can impact in a positive way to ensure clinical trial success.
Thank you, Anna. I think it might help to set a scene for the next couple of slides when it comes to why do we even need to worry about what we're sharing with you today. So to set the scene for these slides, I'd like to share an experience of a severe depression study that I helped with, which had 300 participants. In the review of the raw data for this study in preparation for the CSR clinical study report, after all the timelines had been met, after DM had a successful database lock, after the site COVs were complete, biostats had followed the SAP and had the TLFs in, tables, listings, and figures, but it was discovered that a protocol deviation found in multiple participants was also linked to a key eligibility criteria, which was needed to meet a primary endpoint. And at that moment, it became clear that this unmet criterion would cost the loss of not just 3 to 5, but rather 15 to 20 participants' data across multiple sites. The loss led to discussions about not strictly the potential financial costs, but patient loss, timeline, potential need to reopen the trial, renegotiate vendor contracts, etc., but also there is a potential loss to both the company reputation and KOL, key opinion leader, and site support to both rescreen and then in follow-up post-marketing. So, we have to look at what matters in CNS trials. And to look at that severe depression study, here were some of the points that came up in the review of what needed to be addressed. One was the endpoints were based on scales. Assessor consistency and follow-up was not where it needed to be. So when you're measuring major depression and severe depression, it requires consistent, specialized psychiatric assessments of HAM-Ds or MADRS scales and other scales and tests. You need rigorous, consistent efforts on the part of the site team, and that's needed to ensure safety and all eligibility criteria are met. And then, of course, the data safety monitoring boards are generally required to ensure periodic independent reviews are completed. So this was certainly one aspect. When it comes to another aspect, we were looking at participant reliability and retention. There was a perceived lack of improvement in some of the patients in the early stages. So antidepressants can take weeks to months to show effect, driving early dropout. So for a patient that's already suffering, that can be quite a showstopper. For the study burden portion of that, there were frequent visits. There's often diaries, e-diaries, it could be included, and assessments which accumulate in eroded adherence, again, because the patient simply can't stick with that. So also there are logistical friction issues, such as traveling, scheduling, and communication issues, which compound attrition over long trials. Another issue with the long trial aspect of it is site staff and training. So protocol deviations creep in, such as the one that cost us, in that case, approximately 20 patients. As a site staff and turnover occurs and refresher training lapses over multi-year studies. So each time a new staff member comes on board, they're also getting to know the participants as well. So that can be a very, very big challenge. And then learning where the other team members left off and picked up. Also, the consenting, GCP, and SOP adherence degrades without active recurring oversight. That was certainly an aspect. And then IRB approved documents and coordinator handoffs are easy to lose track of without disciplined monitoring, and that was also an issue. Could we move to the next slide, please?
So before we do that, just Phoebe, just to add to your major depressive disorder experience, just to share my experience in a pediatric epilepsy trial. So again, participant reliability and retention. So a lot of these kids they were looked after by more than one caregiver. So really navigating that and making sure that they actually come to the right visit and come as expected. That was quite a challenge for these sites. So that's just an example from one of the trials I have been involved in. And also regarding training, what I wanted to share also in the past examples in actually all of the CNS trials I was involved in, I did see quite significant training gaps, and I'm talking about the training gaps at the site within the site teams as well as the CRA teams. So at site very often these teams were quite research naive, and that was also due to the fact that there haven't been that many trials in these indications in the last year. The teams have not been built like in oncology. We have always clinical research centers. Everyone knows what they're doing. They almost have their protocol or SOPs. Here, very often the CRA has to kind of build the team while they are initiating the site, and also coordinate with various specialists. For example, the person who would perform NSS, EEGs, and so on. Then another example is more on the CRA side, where in another clinical CNS trial where the CRAs were experienced, they had a number of years as a CRA, but they actually didn't have the indication knowledge and training, and that really was putting the success of the trial at a significant risk. But I will also talk about this maybe a bit later in one of my slides. So thank you so much. Don't want to.
Yes, and Anna,
you
you brought up a very good point when you mentioned the site selection process. That's certainly extremely important as well. And that can be a huge bonus for a larger pharmaceutical firm who may have had well-established relationships with these sites and have the experiences documented in their own records. Sometimes with smaller biofarms or smaller organizations, it's a little more difficult to assess that. So having stricter guidelines at the SQV, and the SIAV around site selection can be key. So anyway, I think that's a really important point. Specific failures, for this slide, we're looking at also some specific failures related to patient eligibility and test scores, which we kind of touched on in the prior slide, but we're looking at a little bit more of a nuance here around the cognitive assessment baseline variability, which affects enrollment eligibility and primary endpoint measurements, and how critical that can be, especially when it comes to what regulatory bodies are typically looking for in severe phase 3 severe depression outcomes, which typically their response is required is defined as greater than or equal to 50% reduction in the total symptom score from baseline, and then in remission, it's defined as reaching a state where symptoms are nearly gone or fall below the clinical threshold, such as a MADRS score, which is less than or equal to 10. And the reason why that point is important, because you can kind of see, especially if you're not working in CNS all the time, just how difficult that might be to do based strictly on assessments. So, how important it is that the assessors are properly trained, have plenty of experience, etc. So another key point would be the CRA and site qualifications in this case. Back to the site selection, and if you have a great deal of experience with a site, you're going to know that there's no way that they can say they maybe have more experience than they do, but when you're a smaller biopharm, you may not be as experienced with these sites. That can make a big difference. So you wouldn't know necessarily whether they have enough training, even if you give them training. It's really helpful if they have baseline training with CNS trials and they know how to deal with the unique patient population, especially if they become high enrollers. And if you're starting to see a consistent loss of primary endpoint data, that can be an issue too. Not to deviate off the path of severe depression, but in a schizophrenia trial, we also noticed, one of the studies I did there were key sites that had better patient retention. So we zeroed in on those sites and tried to find out what the sites were doing. And in many cases, it was simply the study coordinator who had lots of experience with that specific type of patient, knew exactly how to reach them and draw them in and encourage them to keep coming back, et cetera. And as you know, schizophrenia, that's a very tough patient to convince to come back. Additionally, we need to be looking at the PI site staff and CRO and/or CRA lack of GCP training when it comes to understanding what the sites need as well. This can lead to participant safety alert loss of missing safety alerts and documentation, which is truly can become an issue. And then site SOPs, which may potentially inhibit proper documentation of site conduct. And for many of us working with sites these days, there can be many pushbacks to conducting on-site monitoring visits, which can be challenging because you're looking at overall site operations, not just the data when you're overseeing a site. There's also the concern about potential protocol misinterpretation when it comes to delayed or untrained monitoring of eligibility criteria, which also can lead to corrupt data across all enrolled patients at a site. And then, of course, the loss of primary endpoint data, such as a MADRS or HAM-D miscalculation at baseline, which gets back to our first bullet. And then if assessor is inconsistent, additional participant primary endpoint loss from misinterpreted or differences in determination of primary endpoints can occur. And that's extremely important as well. So that can be difficult when it comes to ensuring that one assessor has been seeing the same patient over and over. So looking at how can you resolve that can be important. Anna, did you have anything to add or anybody else?
No.
Okay.
So
that leads,
slide.
Yep, to the big question. We want to know, so what can we do about all this? How can we move forward under these circumstances?
So one of the things that we can do is implement a robust monitoring oversight into the Pivotal program. If you go to the next slide, please. So monitoring oversight is ensuring that monitoring is performed as expected, that the protocol is followed by the site teams as well as the CRAs, and it really prepares us for regulatory inspections, which are absolutely guaranteed for any clinical trial, which is pivotal, and that where the data is going to be submitted to regulatory authorities. And here I just wanted to show some of the, so I'm not going to read it out all, but just the highlights what makes monitoring oversight different from the standard monitoring. First of all, in our experience, we see that certain issues are not really highlighted through the standard KPI review, which obviously should be part of any larger program. We also, this monitoring oversight allows for uncovering certain training gaps or maybe inconsistency in the experience level of certain CRAs or their approaches, monitoring approaches. I highlighted also, no inspection surprises, which is I think quite important in a trial that is heading for a marketing authorization application, and just wanted to highlight one sort of example from one of the trials that we had experience with. We stepped into was the significant SDV backlog. So this SDV backlog was several months. So it was quite really a lot of time. So because of that delay, the sites, the investigators were not receiving the feedback that they were supposed to receive right away. So in between those months, a lot of patients have been enrolled, a lot of patients completed many visits and many dosings. And one of the risks, which luckily was what was possible to mitigate, but there was a risk that the sites were not being advised to escalate the dose as per protocol when some of these patients did not experience that did not have that peak experience in that depression study. So this could, underdosing patients or not stop using the maximum effective dose could put this program at risk. So next slide, please. And some regulatory reference. So we're not going to go over this because this is usually you can obviously have your own reading, but I would like to point out to FDA guideline oversight of clinical investigations where monitoring oversight visits are specifically mentioned. And it's, these visits could be systematic, could be a systematic program or more random. And I think everyone has already been through the update of the ICH GCP R3. So I will leave this to Annemarie, who will also focus on the oversight of clinical trials in general. But for your reference, you can also find some references to the FDA warning letters, so as well as the findings and the summary of inspections for EMA, which is also available from 2024. I think it's quite good reading for everyone, and we obviously can share those links with you after this webinar. So next slide, please, and I'm handing over to Nanna, who will be talking about the metrics with some of the examples that we have from our programs.
Yeah, so I think that was enough introduction, Denise. So just next slide. So as both Phoebe and Andrea has explained, the CNS trials are more vulnerable to issues that can directly impact endpoint integrity. The observations I have with me here are not all inclusive. We focus specifically on the findings that matters the most for trial outcome. Things like side file gaps or administrative issues are real issues, but they are more easy fixable and less likely to affect the data in a meaningful way. So that's why we've left them out. And just to point out, the data I have with me are collected from our own work and from our monitoring oversight programs. So what we are seeing here is that the proportion of critical observation in CNS is significantly higher than in other therapeutic areas. And I will come back to that, why I say that in the next slide. For us, this isn't surprising given the complexity of CNS trials, where we speak of subjective endpoints, rate of variability, and the nature of patient population that all add layers of risk. The data makes a clear case that CNS programs needs a closer level of monitoring attention. And especially if we take a look at some of the data, the endpoint related data discrepancies are almost at 50% for CNS trials. Next slide. So as I said, we see they are way more seen in CNS trials. So to put CNS picture in a perspective, we've pulled in data from one of our oncology programs. And the comparison is valuable because it is in data demonstrated that CNS programs require a greater monitoring focus. The volume of critical observation in CNS are clearly higher than what we see in oncology. And so to say, the data speaks for itself. As I said, that the endpoint related data discrepancies for CNS was almost at 50%, and in 4 oncology studies we have seen that it is for 17%. Not saying that that's not a high number, but it's significantly less than what we see for CNS.
And Nanna, I think it's really important to add for the audience here that we are showing the observations discovered by oversight monitors. So these are the observations or issues that have been found only by the oversight monitors, because oversight monitors don't report the same issues as the CRAs are reporting. This is only on top. So you can really see sort of the scale of these additional observations and we're talking about pivotal clinical trials here.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for pointing that out, Anna. And so that said, monitoring oversight still remains important for all therapeutic areas, even if we see a smaller portion of observations in the oncology compared to the CNS. But given that we have seen in CNS data, the need is especially pressing here. And the higher rate of critical findings makes a strong case for prioritizing and identifying the oversight in CNS programs where the risk to endpoint integrity is considerably greater. Yeah, next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Nanna. I think that really contributes to how we look at overseeing clinical trials, especially after R2 and R3. R3 making it abundantly clear for all of us. And I think what you're also saying is translating into the risks that come with conducting trials and the risk-based approach that we are all taking these days. I wanted to point out some specific elements that are a part of sponsor oversight that we have been used to implementing, while that actually have some other side to it. So I think everybody's used to work with KPIs, and we're tracking these KPIs, reviewing these KPIs. But KPIs have 2 things with them. They only report after something has already occurred. That alone, it's also not a risk in itself. Usually KPIs are the standard KPIs that CROs are offering, rather than where we actually think about what metrics do we think are useful, so that as a sponsor we can actually oversee these trials properly, risk-based. Other aspects that are important for a sponsor to oversee their trials are related to the mistakes and the misinterpretations from sites. And that cannot be seen until monitors catch them. But as we've heard from Nanna as well as from Phoebe, is that there are things that are in the way of monitors. And I know that Phoebe will present some more details about that as well later on, that they are not bringing them forward and not timely enough. Further on, we're quite used to sticking to CRFs that collect data, while there's also pressure to limit the data we collect to the data that we analyze, but that would leave out things that we could then not catch remotely, therefore requiring on-site verifies to actually catch these, such as who's the rater and what's going on with potential rater drift. And then also there's a lot of focus on monitoring metrics that do flag CRA performance or underperformance, but it does do that late, and the information is also limited. You can't always catch everything. And if we look a little bit more specific into the KPIs, I've listed a couple of these, but these are usually, again, reporting late and not looking at what metrics are actually useful to understand trends towards that, something that might become an issue. So rather than looking at, for example, for the enrollment, we're looking at not the number of patients, but also the pace. Is the pace of recruitment what you've been expecting? Because that's something that will flag earlier than your number. And the same is quality versus the percentage of screen failures. It requires looking into why patients screen fail and not just the numbers. And this way, there's a lot of emphasis that you can put onto looking at what's actually going on versus just crunching numbers and looking at KPIs. I did not want to leave out the point that if you implement monitoring oversight early on in your study and communicate this, it should be a three-partite in the classical setup. It should be a three-partite situation with the sponsor, the CRO, and the monitoring oversight party, if that's a third party. And then they should all work together. It's not one against the other. But by implementing this early, you're setting the expectations right from the start. And it also does have an effect on the CRO understanding that there will be someone looking over their shoulder early on. Next slide, please. So that brings us into protecting the primary endpoint, which is what we're focusing on to actually protect our investment into these trials. And then if we look at what does monitoring oversight bring and what does effective monitoring oversight look like, I've touched upon some of this previously, but basically it requires that you apply that risk-based monitoring strategy, and part of that should be then monitoring oversight as that independent look from another angle, from another wider level that an oversight monitor will look with a different perspective. And by doing that early enough, I've written here, within the first 5 monitoring visits from a CRA, but that depends a little bit on the frequency. The point is, don't wait until you have a lot of data. Make sure you go timely enough when there is data, but not so much that if things are going off, that you can't correct them. So go early in, and that also helps with ensuring that everybody is doing the right things with the right training. A strategy that we stand behind, not being the only one, but we from AnRes are using often the selection of starting with 1 monitoring oversight visit per CRO monitor. And it's important that there are risk-based criteria to select sites for monitoring oversight visits. So if there is a monitor that is responsible for multiple sites, which of these sites do you choose? But also if you want to expand on criteria that you will perform more monitoring oversight visits, what are these criteria, and do these risk-based? And then finally, it's very important as part of your oversight as a sponsor that you review any trends, you create and execute action plans, and you oversee that these are then finally completed to resolution. I think that hands me over to Phoebe.
So, we've touched on many points here, and we'd really like to summarize that, where monitoring oversight can make a huge difference when it comes to rate or drift, ineligible participant randomization, IMP dosing errors, and other vendor-related errors, AE, SAE underreporting. I don't know how deep into the weeds we want to go with each of these, but I think, it's pretty clear that we can, we've touched on this before, have dedicated trained raters, improved protocol interpretation, ensure everybody's on the same page with clarification letters where needed, and oversight visits can help pinpoint where clarification may be needed as well. And then, following through with preparing guides that can be shared directly with caregivers when it comes to dosing and e-diaries, and ensuring that data gets reviewed. Many of you have been involved in, I'm sure, other trials, especially when it comes to imaging trials where, CT scans aren't being reviewed properly by CRAs. All of that needs to be taken into account when you're completing oversight visits. And then also, we don't want to be rewarding SDV speed at the expense of AE reporting or other very important, eligibility criteria. I think that pretty much covers this slide for now.
I really liked, Phoebe,
sorry.
when you spoke about earlier, when we were discussing these topics, I really liked your points about what happens in the recap after a visit, but also the different focus that an oversight monitor has. Can you say something more about that?
Yes, thank you. That's another thing when we're having conversations in these oversight visits with the CRAs and sites. We typically do defer to the CRAs, but to have direct communication, and that means having these conversations with them. It's certainly at the time of the closure of the visits to recap, and sometimes you get some really interesting responses. Especially certainly your delivery has to be shared with a humble spirit, because of course, we want these CRAs to be taking pride in their work. So it's also a good thing when they stand up and say, hey, I saw this differently. But so many times you get the perspective of, I never thought of that before, or what a good idea, or thank you for helping me have a better conversation with my sites. And giving them that direct and more balanced perspective from start to finish can be a really beneficial experience for them. And I've personally had quite a few CRAs come back with positive feedback about that. Was that what you were talking about, Anne? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that we have run a little bit over. So of course we are just wrapping up. So thank you for staying a little bit over. If someone needs to drop off, of course,
we've got one more slide.
This session is recorded, but I also would like to actually add to this, if that's okay, to stay a bit longer. Is the experience that we had, Phoebe, right, when we actually observed one of the larger CRAs where they were incentivized to meet their SDV metrics, and they would 100% focus on reviewing different visits. So they, that progress, visit progress was visible in the SDV metrics, but it was completely neglected, but completely AE review and concomitant medication review, because obviously no metrics could be applied. So still, even if we're focusing on efficacy in phase 3 clinical trials, I mean, safety is really still very much in focus. So So that's one of the areas where monitoring oversight can actually help with where we can find some unreported AEs or even SAEs.
Absolutely, totally agree, Anna, and that's so true, and it can be a real problem because, of course, to meet a timeline, you do have to think about checking boxes, but it can get very easy, especially under pressure for a CRA, and especially if they're inexperienced, to just, say, okay, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do, and just press on and not, push back at all with their management and say, hey, look, this is taking more time. There's an issue here, da 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 da. So yeah, it's extremely important to not hyper focus on SDV when there are other issues at stake.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah, and the next one. So that brings us to our last slide, and I've been given the honor to close it for you. So what are our takeaways? I really would like to round us off by saying that monitoring oversight is one of the strategies to apply to ensure clinical trial success. It brings another perspective, a more global, more comprehensive perspective, where CRAs are very focused on one thing, on one site, on SDV, where the preparation by oversight monitor does allow, and the experience that they bring in particular as well, does allow for bringing up the issues that are not caught in any other way. With the point of the late issue detection, the later something is detected, the more impactful it is. There can be a significant financial loss, but don't forget about the reputational loss as well as the costs of those key opinion leaders that maybe are not so enthusiastic to work with you again as a sponsor if this happened, but also the fact that they are your future prescribers, and so are your patients. So this reputational loss goes way beyond the regulatory one, and does have a financial impact as well. Then the knowledge gap is so real in study and site teams in CNS trials, has been thoroughly presented by everyone from this team of experts. And monitoring oversight prepares sponsors for regulatory inspections. It may not be shown in dollars, but it's real when you're working and you're making your preparations for market approval and going through everything. So with that, despite us being over time, I think we can ask if there are any pressing questions by anybody. Krista. Hi, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too. I'm really interested. Obviously, AnRes provides this as a service, the monitoring oversight. But what is your experience? I feel that the term monitoring oversight is I wouldn't say new, but it's becoming more and more popular and accepted. So what is your experience with, let's say, mid-size to large CROs? Are they providing real monitoring oversight? I think in theory, like the CTL would do regular co-monitoring visits to do some of these tasks, but is your experience that that's really insufficient?
So let me take that one because in the programs that we have been participating so far, monitoring oversight programs, we had the pleasure working with both smaller and also very large CROs. And we also saw a lot of good things. So this is definitely has been a very, very positive experience. But we have seen a little bit different challenges, I think, in the smaller CROs versus the larger CROs. And then to answer specifically the topic about the oversight that the CROs are performing, from our experience, and Phoebe, let me know what was your experience, but we really couldn't sense that the sponsor had any visibility of those activities. We couldn't, it was almost, at least in our experience, non-existent. I believe there were these oversight visits performed as per the CRO SOPs, but we haven't really seen much of that activity. And there we couldn't also observe the transparency, neither from the smaller ones or the larger ones. So another interesting thing that we have, like when you compare the larger CROs from the smaller CROs, so the smaller CROs usually, a lot of the, at least in that specific experience, CRA stayed long term, but they had some training gaps, and I think the oversight was a little bit, the training was a little bit lacking in the sort of monitoring standards. In larger ones, of course, these CROs have very well developed training programs from their CRAs, a lot of, checklists developed for them to tick off. It's more standards are a bit sort of more consistent across. But very often what we have also experienced was there were several layers between the CRA and the sponsor of, CTLs, PMs, or what have you, but that very often, when the issues were supposed to be raised, they were either lost in some way or lost, in communication. Then maybe only a portion was escalated. At least that was my experience. I don't know, Phoebe.
And I agree. And I really like the word transparency, how important that is. How many times I've been to a site as an oversight monitor, reviewed the log and found an extra person, and then gone back to the report and realized, okay, there was another person here on site and listed as a co-monitor. It turns out it's a CTL or someone else, and nothing related to, how that oversight visit was conducted, or how the CTL, interacted with the CRA. So there's, we have special SOPs we follow, we have special reports we follow. We do not overlap with work they're already doing necessarily. We're very specific assignment on our end, whereas the CTL from a large or even a small organization, CRO, like I said, just typically you just have no idea what they were really doing there. In some cases, I've seen where the CTL actually seemed to be learning from the CRA.
Yeah. Can I conclude from what all of you are saying is that monitoring oversight visits is not the same as co-monitoring? Is that a fair conclusion from the question and the answer? Maybe Gentiane, you want to add something here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had the chance to perform a sponsor oversight visit after an audit and after a co-monitoring visit. And I will tell you that we are not looking at the same thing. So the auditor was focusing on compliance on all those aspects, and the CRA was really happy to have someone to discuss, to exchange when we are on site for a sponsor oversight visit. It's a time that we spend to exchange some idea, to share the way we are looking at the same data. So it was very useful for the CRA and also for the site to have someone who is really independent. So we are coming from outside. We have fresh eyes. We are really focusing on data quality and protocol compliance, and we had very, very good discussion with the site and with the series. So it was really fruitful discussion. So that's a point that I would like to add.
Thank you. Krista, does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks.
Something else? Anybody had any other questions? We're happy to take them. We love the discussions.
Yeah, or offline.
Absolutely.
So,
And
yeah, go ahead.
I was hoping to give a shout out to Jimmy, James Keegan here. Thanks for joining. We have a history. I think we've done some oversight together at some point. So we're glad you could join, Jimmy. I think you're still here. Yeah.
Thank
Anyway.
you so much, everyone, and thank you so much for your time today. Have a lovely afternoon, rest of the day, depending on your location. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks
everyone.
very much.
Thanks.
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye,
bye.
everyone.
Bye.